All right, this is the biochemistry lecture for anatomy physiology 2000, and I don't know what the year is. So in general, we have to intro the class with what is biochemistry. It's sort of the basis for all the things that we're going to study and learn about. A study of chemical interactions of living things or within living things. And what we'll end up seeing is all the various physical properties today of the biological molecules and how they work, how they're involved in living things as well, including things that make you happy, like manufacture of medical treatments and new drugs and things. So all these macromolecules incorporate some number of these elements: carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, and they're found in varying amounts. So in your bodies, there are millions of reactions occurring all at the same time. And all these reactions that are occurring we call your metabolism. And in fact, many of these reactions release heat, and these reactions are responsible for maintaining your body temperature. The main element that you'll see found in all these various macromolecules is carbon in large volumes, large amounts. These large molecules have many different atoms, and they're all bonded with covalent bonds. Maybe that sounds familiar from chemistry. Macromolecules, macro just means large, and there's four types that we're going to talk about here right now. Carbohydrates, lipids, which are actually not really macromolecules, which I think is stupid, but they're not really macromolecules, textbook definition. Proteins, and nucleic acids. So let's hit carbohydrates first. Carbohydrates are just sugars, as you know, of varying complexity, and their main thing is to provide energy and also some structure. Now there's three levels or three types of carbohydrates or saccharides. There's monosaccharides, which is one sugar ring, such as glucose, and this provides immediate, very quick energy. Disaccharides are two sugars, hence the di at the front of saccharide, meaning two. Two sugars, which provides short energy storage or short term. This is an example would be fructose or sucrose. And then lastly, polysaccharides are very complex, many sugars, and these provide long-term energy and also help in the forming of structures. So cellulose, starch, and so on, that we'll show you in a bit. So one of the main polysaccharides that you need to know is glycogen. Now glycogen is a long polymer or a large molecule of glucose. Many glucose rings attached side by side. And it's a storage molecule for sugar. When you eat excess sugar, you try to store as much of that sugar as glycogen in the liver and in the muscle, and in small amounts in the sperm, but mostly liver and muscle. And once that's maxed out, you end up actually converting that excess sugar into lipids, but that's for a later date. So glycogen is your next available energy source. When you start to exercise, you use up all the sugar that's already there in your bloodstream, and then when all that's gone, you start to release from your liver and your muscles extra glucose. Each glucose ring breaks off of glycogen, basically, and frees it up for energy. Cellulose is a glucose polymer you can't actually use. Cellulose is basically fiber for you. It's the sugar that's used in the cell walls of plants and the cell walls of bacteria and of algae and so on. And it's the most abundant organic molecule. It's very common, as you probably know. It's also very tough, which is why in part why we can't digest it. The chemical links are incorrect, or our body doesn't have the enzyme to break down that certain kind of covalent bond. So it just passes right through you. Chitin, one you probably don't know about, is a glucose polymer. It's used in exoskeletons of insects and crustaceans, and it's actually also the basis for a dissolvable surgical thread. So here we see polysaccharides. This is an example of cellulose that you can see right there. And the cellulose, you see all the various long chains where each ring is basically one glucose molecule, one sugar. And it's very complex and very dense. Other polysaccharides, for example, here we see glycogen, where we have long glucose molecules. I won't get into the details, that's not important for us, but these glucose rings are connected differently than they are when found in cellulose. So this, of course, we use, cellulose we don't. Macromolecule number 2, lipids. Lipids are insoluble in water, so you're going to want to consider oil and water, or if you like, when you go to the Italian food restaurant, and you have your olive oil and your vinegar mixture together on the table, and you're dipping your bread in it. Oh, that sounds so good right now. I think I need to eat. And you're dipping your bread in. Well, the two they don't mix together. They separate. And if, in fact, you decided to be a child once again and shake it all up, and next time you're at the restaurant, I encourage you to do that. I didn't tell you that, although I'm being recorded, so I probably did. When you shake it all up, you see all these little tiny small droplets of fat in amongst the vinegar, and then if you leave it sitting for a minute, then it'll separate itself again. They're insoluble. Oil is non-polar, and the vinegar is polar, or basically it likes water. It's hydrophilic. All right, back to lipids. 4 types. Triglycerides, these are the ones that get all the bad news, the bad rep. Long-term energy storage, they're also used for insulation. As you know, people that are obese tend to get hotter more easily because fat is used for insulation, and the same goes for all different kinds of other animals. It is also partially true, at least the research shows, that those people that live in colder areas carry a slightly larger percentage of body fat. Helps them to be insulated from the cold. So triglycerides include fats and oils. If you eat a hamburger, it is full of triglycerides, and that's why it tastes so good. Phospholipids are the lipids found in the membrane of the cell, and we'll show you a little bit about phospholipids here in a second. Steroids are used for cell signaling and for hormones. Steroids are actually cholesterol molecules that are modified to form hormones. So there's steroid-based hormones, if you like, and it's also used for communication from cell to cell. Examples being testosterone and estrogen, of course. And then we have waxes, which we will talk about very little, but these are mainly used by plants as protection. You know, there's a waxy covering over fruits, or the waxy cuticle over leaves, which you probably didn't know, or the wax in your ears, and so on. So let's take a look at this real quick. Here's triglycerides. You might have heard of unsaturated versus saturated fats. Here we're just looking at one fatty acid. Now, triglyceride has 3 fatty acids. Oh, I wonder why it says tri at the front of the glycerides. All ides are basically fats. So here we have an unsaturated fat. Here's the glycerol portion in red, and each one of these is a fatty acid. So this is triglyceride, such as in corn oil or canola oil or and so on. So what you see, the reason it's unsaturated, as you remember from chemistry, is that because there's one or more double bonds. So a monounsaturated fat that you see on the back on the label says so because there is one double bond, where this is a polyunsaturated fat because there are 3 double bonds here, 2 or more. Here we see triglyceride. The typical one you think of with triglyceride is butter, yum. And this is a saturated fat. Saturated fats are considered less healthy, although it's a little bit debatable. We can talk about that separately if you like. But saturated fats have no double bonds, and so they're considered to be stickier or more solid at room temperature, and hence you can see butter solid at room temperature versus oil. Unsaturated fats cause kinks or bends, as you can see here, and as a result they are more fluid when many of them are put together in the membranes and so on. So these are a little bit healthier. These are a little bit more sticky, as you can see here, bacon fat, butter, hamburger, and so on. Here's the phospholipids. I wanted to be able to show you a picture before I described it. Phospholipids are basically triglycerides minus one of the fatty acids, and in place of one of the fatty acids is incorporated a phosphate group, and this makes this head here polar. This phosphate group is very, very polar, meaning it likes water, and these fatty acid chains, because of these long hydrocarbon chains, as we call them, lots and lots of carbons, they don't like water. They're non-polar, and as a result, when you put these into water, they form a bubble, a little sphere of fat, and on the inside of the membrane here, notice it forms a double layer, are the fatty acid tails, because they don't like water. They want to be as far apart as possible. And on the outsides are the polar regions. These are the parts that like water. Steroids, another example. Here we see cholesterol, and everything is based off of cholesterol. Yes, it's important to have cholesterol. If your father or mother takes cholesterol-lowering medications, they need to be checked frequently to make sure their cholesterol levels don't get too low, of course, because too low and they can't produce steroid hormones. Steroids are important, although do not inject them. There's all kinds of problems we'll talk about later. Estrogen is another example of steroid hormone, and here's testosterone. Why are there 2 birds looking at you? I don't know, but it's a cool picture. Waxes, we already talked about, earwax, the waxy covering over fruit and so on, moving on from that. Third macromolecule, proteins. These are most complicated. They serve lots of different purposes, including support, used for enzymes, transport, defense, hormones, and motion, and we'll show you some of this in, slide by slide. Proteins are made of amino acids. Now there's 20 different amino acids, and the arrangement of all those amino acids make up the proteins. In fact, millions of different combinations that are possible. Now you put a few amino acids together and you get a peptide. You put a few peptides together and you get a polypeptide. Okay? You put multiple polypeptides together and you get a protein. That's kind of the scale up for proteins. Here, collagen is a protein. Collagen, the stuff that you take from your butt and you inject into your lips. Well, probably not you, but maybe your mom. Maybe your mom has giant fat model lips, and she got those lips from her butt. Antibodies. Here we see antibodies. Yes, the letter Y. It's not really a letter Y. This is an antibody produced from a plasma cell, part of your immune system. These are proteins. We'll talk about that at a later date. Cell transport. Red blood cells incorporate protein to carry oxygen. Here's that protein called hemoglobin. It's got multiple components, and in that hemoglobin it carries oxygen, part of this heme component. We don't need to know the details yet. That's for a later date. But proteins are used in red blood cells. Motion, your muscles, they work using proteins, actin and myosin. Here is myosin, this ribbon-looking thing, and these balls here are actin. And this crazy-looking picture with all this detail, don't worry. You'll be happy to know that you get to learn all about that later. Fourth macromolecule, nucleic acids. They're each built by a phosphate group, a nitrogenous base, meaning it incorporates nitrogen, and a 5-carbon sugar called ribose or deoxyribose. So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. Not important that you memorize the name, but this is your main genetic material in all your cells. There's also RNA, which you use, ribonucleic acid, just a different sugar. Genetic material, of course, also the same, but it's typically found single-stranded, whereas DNA is double-stranded. And then lastly, we have ATP. Yes, ATP is a nucleic acid, and the main reason why we have to talk about it in this class is we'll talk a lot about ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The adenosine group is actually adenine, the A of DNA, and it's a high-energy molecule. Here's DNA. You can see double-stranded helix that twists. Here's a nucleotide structure. Just the basic idea of these nucleic acids is they are made of nucleotides, long chains of nucleotides. Again, a nucleotide is a phosphate, a base, and a sugar that actually connects the two of them together, and they form long chains. Not important that you remember the C, the T, the U, the A, and the G of DNA or RNA, although you hopefully learned about that in regular bio. Most importantly, fish can be eaten by cat. No, that's not the most important thing. Chemistry is the basis for life. All of which we'll talk about is all based on chemistry and chemical interactions, and you'll hear all these different macromolecules repeated over and over throughout the course. So, good luck.